All right, we're excited to have another editor podcast here at The Spoon. We have the usual crew. Let's go around and say hi to everyone. Jen Marston, we'll start with you. You're going to head to Spain in a couple of weeks. Are you all ready?
I am. Well, I'm not packed yet, but mentally I am definitely
You don't pack
ready.
3 weeks in advance? I thought everyone did.
You know, I'm just too busy talking about restaurant tech.
And that's what you're going to be doing in Spain. Catherine, you and I will be in New York City. Jen will be flying in on the red eye, all tired from Spain. But we'll be in New York City in a couple of weeks. Are you packed yet?
Oh, most definitely not. And I won't be until probably 4 hours before my flight. That's kind of my style.
You went to Portland this weekend with your parents. You should just
I did.
Same suitcase packed. And
yeah, it might be a little colder in New York, but I got to get ready. Yeah, we're going for our food personalization event, Customized. So if you're in the area, come say hi. I think it's going to be super fun.
We're all traveling. Chris, you're actually getting into the sun next week. Just personal rest and relaxation, though.
Yeah, I'm going to take a few days off next week because it is just continues to be cold and oppressively gray up here in the Pacific Northwest.
That it is. Although we had a couple of nice days this week. Speaking of gray in Pacific Northwest, we'll speak about a Seattle-based company up here in the Northwest called PicoBrew, and we'll kick off with that story. I wrote and actually had the scoop last week about PicoBrew putting themselves or being put up for sale, essentially being forced to be put up for sale, which is kind of a big deal in our kind of coverage because this is a company I've written about for 3 or 4 years. You could certainly say, and Chris, you'll probably agree, they're kind of the leading homebrew company out there, and they were basically forced into what's a process called receivership. Anyone who is familiar with kind of like those types of terms here in Washington State, they're basically being put up for an auction. They were being forced to do that by their lending group, a bridge lending group who had loaned them money and basically called in the loan because PicoBrew wasn't able to close their second big strategic funding round, even though they had a lot of people interested. They weren't able to kind of close the deal. So it's kind of interesting news. You wrote about it as well, Chris, and kind of wondered what it meant for the homebrew market.
I think to your point, I refer to them as sort of the gold standard for crowdfunding, like beer making appliances. Drink making appliances are big on crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter. And PicoBrew had a history of not only raising like millions of dollars on Kickstarter, but also coming through with what they said, right? So they delivered. Their products came out. I think you have one, right, Mike?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So you have a PicoBrew. And, the question I raised is if they're not able to remain as an ongoing concern, right? They're in receivership. What does that mean for other independent beer making? What does it mean for the market of home beer making appliances, right? Like all these appliances came to market or went crowdfunding, Hoppy, iGaloo, BrewBot, and all promised to use technology to make home beer brewing easier, right? Like you can use an app to monitor things and know when to ferment and when to toss wort or what. I have no idea. I don't brew beer, so I don't know. But like all of those companies are gone. Hoppy, iGaloo, BrewBot they're gone. They don't, they flamed out for various reasons. And we went to the PicoBrew offices, I think like a year ago or a couple of years ago, and they're not flashy, right? Like it's not like a startup where they had, some $50,000 conference table, at least that I know of, right? Like it was like an industrial place where they did work. So it's just interesting. Is it a matter of, let me ask you this, Mike, actually, how often do you use the PicoBrew?
Well, I don't use it as much because I stopped drinking, but I do think they have been challenged because it's pretty expensive, and for a big chunk of their time is, and we talked a little bit about this morning, Chris. They kind of forced you into basically a captive ingredient system or proprietary ingredient system with their Pico packs. Over the past year or two, I've increasingly just talked about how I think that strategy hasn't really worked for pretty much anyone outside of the Nespresso and Keurigs of the world, and so. I think last year they basically opened up the system. I know some of the other ones coming out like Mini Brew and also the one you've written about, Brewmaker, they're more of an open system. But I think that's part of the problem. But just generally, people get busy. What has actually worked, I think, in kind of crowdfunded or kind of new tech in homebrewing is kind of pieces of the puzzle or tools, right? So if you look at like Beer Maker, and I was thinking about this morning, Beer Maker. That's not their first product. Like the guy behind the company had a product called Brew Jacket.
Yeah.
It's basically a fermentation temperature tester. And that actually did really well. So I think and if you look at like, for example, other spaces like in barbecue, like these connected kind of temperature sensors. If you provide people with tools rather than like kind of an entire kind of captive ecosystem, like that seems to actually be more successful because they can fit it into their existing workflow. And I'm just wondering with like homebrew, like bringing parts of the equation to make it easier to the table rather than completely captive technology systems might be maybe the way that the consumer or the homebrewer wants to go.
As someone who has not brewed their own beer, but have many friends who do, I kind of just wonder if there's a market for people who want this simplification to the process, because my friends who do brew their own beer love sort of the DIY process. They love going shopping online for the different, ingredients and doing it themselves and like tracking it themselves. And so I don't know if they necessarily want a simplification. And something that I wonder if it could be more of a viable market is this device that I saw at CES called In the Keg, which is sort of PicoBrew one step up in terms of output. So it's for like either small restaurants or events and catering companies where you could make entire big kegs of beer for a special event, say a wedding or something like that, where maybe there's a little bit more of a market for that. And they do still have you captive. They have their own pods, but they're at least so far doing well. Who knows? But something where it's not for sort of the niche home brewer who loves experimenting and DIYing, but for bigger events where people just want something that's a little bit more customized.
Mike, I think your point about like a tool is a good one, right? Like the PicoBrew is an appliance. It does everything. And for the longest time when you had to buy the Pico packs, it dictated everything. But like you said, the beer maker is really more of a tool because you could throw anything in there. You don't have to use their ingredients. You can if you want. I think to your point, Catherine, that you're right, that there are certain people who really, if you're into it, you're kind of into it. But I wonder when you look at something like a beer maker, right? Like they use these bladders that you install so you don't have to sterilize things. You don't have to sterilize your tubes and your buckets or whatever, right? Like you can just slip it in and then you are free to experiment, right? You can throw in your own hops and yeast and everything, or even throw in stuff from your backyard if you wanted to see how grass shavings affected the impact of your beer, right? Like you could still experiment, but it is sort of like an open platform and it doesn't take up a ton of space if you are sort of into it. Yeah. It's not trying to tell you how to do everything. It's just trying to make what you want to do, perhaps, which is brew beer, easier.
Yeah. And I think part of what, they had some initial success, at least with like craft beer makers, with the Zymatic. Their first product basically allowed brewers to basically experiment on a small scale, then scale it up. The thing about the Pico is you by and large took a lot of the creativity out of it. Like you automated it. And I think a lot of homebrewers get into this to kind of like as an escape, a way to kind of maybe have some sort of personal creativity and expression. Even if, you're making a beer, you're making a craft. And I think the Pico, the problem maybe with the Pico for them is like it took all that creativity out of it. So that's another problem. And then if you just look at PicoBrew, the company, they're really an interesting company and they're a complex company in that they have like 3 or 4 different product lines. And this kind of segues a little bit to the next story because we'll talk about one of their other product lines. But they have these home beer makers. They've also lately, the last year or two, started to pivot towards more professional beer makers with their big kind of Pico Z systems. They've also teased a coffee maker that basically is positioned as a Keurig killer because it's a kind of a post-plastic pod type of coffee maker. And then finally, another story I wrote about this on this Monday about PicoBrew is they have this spirits aging technology, which is actually pretty cool. And I'll talk about it a little bit. It's basically this idea that, most whiskey, most rum that you drink, if it's the good stuff, it's been sitting in a barrel for like 8 years, right? Like that's how you get those nice brown colors. You get kind of the nature of the wood, you get kind of the cycle of the seasons, all that kind of contributes to the flavor of whiskey. But they've created a technology that basically takes moonshine, just white distillate out of the kind of the still, and then instantly ages it overnight. And they actually are pitching this to distilleries, et cetera. So I thought that's a pretty interesting technology. I also think like for craft kind of cocktail makers, like the Dave Arnolds of the world, like that could be like the next big thing, right? Creating your own kind of core liquor. Jen, you live in New York City. You probably, or you have certainly in the past, you spent a lot of time there. You probably had some hipster made cocktails.
How dare you?
You're living in Brooklyn. Come on. Could you envision like some of your kind of craft cocktail makers wanting to actually make their own base spirits?
Yeah, I think that I can definitely see that as being definitely a hipster bar cocktail trend for sure. Just because there's a certain, one, I mean, if you're the person making it, it gives you more control over I don't know a ton about it, but I would think it gives you more control over the taste and the recipe and everything. And two, that's just kind of a cool selling point for your drinks at a bar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I made my whiskey in the bar here type of thing.
Yeah. I mean,
normally
it's bathtub in the back.
Given the number of hipsters I know who just anytime you say moonshine, they start, saliva starts coming out of their mouth because it's such a cool thing. I think like made right here in the basement could actually be draw people in. Some people.
Mike, I read your piece, and one thing that came to mind immediately was the Glyph whiskey, which is the molecular whiskey.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the company, but they reassemble whiskey and molecule by molecule and age it overnight, and it was not good. It tasted, it had is like overly smooth to the point of tasting like what I had read, I think somewhere was like an apple brandy. And I was just like, oh, it lacked a punch. It lacked dimensionality. So I'm curious about the aging tech that Pico has come out with.
Yeah. And I don't know enough about the molecular whiskey. I do. So just to clarify what they do, right? They'll take like cheap whiskey off the shelf, almost straight out of the still moonshine, and they'll age that, right? And that's that kind of white kind of cheap stuff is actually what starts out in the barrel. And then over like a matter of years, when you have like the wood and other things kind of intermingling and kind of the cycle of the seasons, that's what makes like good whiskey or good rum. So they're not actually just you could make your own with a Pico still, but like what they're envisioning is like you just take cheaper whiskey or cheaper liquor and then make like your own interesting kind of base liquor by aging it yourself overnight.
This is like a way nicer version. I don't know if anyone ever did this in college, but you ever hear that rumor about how you take like terrible vodka and then you put it through like a Brita or something 10 times and it becomes way better? Don't know if that actually worked. I never tried it.
Oh, sure. I thought it was a good insight to what Catherine's college days were.
I actually did. I had some colleagues who tried it for a food website I worked for once, but I can see this being something where not only is it like, oh, so hip to say we distilled it ourselves, but it's also just like a money saving thing where you can buy really cheap stuff and make it way better and also sort of take credit for the DIY aspect. But Mike, you got to try this, right? What do you think it stands up to its promises?
Yeah, well, I went into PicoBrew headquarters and they have like, it's kind of almost scary. They just have like all these different bottles lying around that look like with brown liquid in it. Like, and they're pouring me it. And I don't know what, I'm not really drinking this year, so I'm taking very small sips just to taste it. Right. But it's interesting because Jim Mitchell, their chief science officer, who's Bill's brother, the co-founders, is just experimenting. One of the things that's interesting is he was, you can't age liquor in like barrels that aren't like oak, right? Like you can't do it in like an applewood barrel, but with their process, they're putting little esters or the little kind of pieces of wood in the aging thing. So like they'll age with different flavors of wood that you couldn't with the barrel, right? Because of like an applewood barrel would break down. They're aging the liquor with coffee beans, and so I tasted like a coffee bean flavored whiskey. So I think it gives you like a palate if you're a cocktail maker, a bartender, and you want to be really creative to maybe do interesting things you normally couldn't. So I think that's interesting. And then there's another piece to this. Like I often think about like the startup distillery, like the thing about like if you start making drinks, if you make something like a whiskey, you have to wait 6 years before you can sell it. Like I always thought that's really hard if you're like an upstart whiskey maker. So, and that's why you actually see a lot of like upstarts selling their white kind of moonshine. They're with straight out of the still stuff, but you could basically also start to sell this stuff that says like a whiskey version of your moonshine. So anyway, I think it was kind of interesting. Chris, you wrote about another story, I think, this past week, and it's something that's also been on my mind, the impact of coronavirus and what it's going to ultimately do to businesses in China, but also across the world. And so talk a little bit about this story about KFC and Pizza Hut in China and the coronavirus.
So we've actually run 2 stories. I've done one and Jen did the other. I'll just speak briefly.
3, actually.
Okay.
You did. That's right. You did the one, the follow-up. Well,
I should actually give my author straight when I'm actually.
So I wrote about the robot that was roaming through a quarantined hotel in Hangzhou, China. I hope I probably pronounced that wrong. I apologize. So what's interesting is the biggest thing with coronavirus is sort of person-to-person contact, right? So how do you minimize person-to-person contact? And well, one of the ways might be through robots, which you can send up and down the hall. They're not going to be scared. They're not going to balk at it. And I feel like I need to say this every time. The deadly coronavirus, there are a lot of issues with it. And, one of the ways, actually, you know what, now that I think about it, getting food is important, especially if your city is on lockdown. How do you get your food? And if you can't go to the grocery store in person, what's going to happen? So, they're employing robots at this hospital. But Jen, you also talked about, what Pizza Hut and KFC are doing in terms of actual delivery drivers and getting restaurant food to people who are sort of on this lockdown.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I had a similar reaction initially that you did, Chris. My first thought was, look, this is a deadly virus outbreak. Why are we talking about food delivery? And then I stopped and was like, because people have to eat and people around the country are on lockdown. And so how do you go to the grocery store? How do you get food, which you need? And as it turns out, a lot of people are thinking about this, and a lot of it's interesting for all the complaining I tend to do on the Spoon about the negative side of these third-party delivery companies. They're kind of a lifesaver in this situation. You've got local delivery services as well as some of the bigger international ones kind of banding together, getting restaurants on board. They're delivering food to doctors and nurses and medical staff on the front lines in like Wuhan. And then you've also got this thing that's come up called contactless delivery, which is where, and this is what KFC and Pizza Hut and some other folks have been doing, where the driver basically suits up before their delivery, puts on a mask, disinfects the carrying case that the delivery order goes into. They've already spoken to the customer and designated a spot outside the customer's house or apartment building where they'll put the food. So that's all been arranged ahead of time. They put the food there and then they step back. So what basically the CDC has said that 6 feet is kind of if you're under 6 feet, that's when person-to-person contact could potentially spread this virus further. And so there has to be a 10-foot limit between delivery person and the customer. So they're dropping the food and watching the customer pick it up. And only after that do they retrieve their container and head off to disinfect it and do the next delivery.
So I think the bigger question here, Mike, is will this impact delivery going forward, right? This is not going to be the last pandemic. And, will this start instituting new procedures? Will we start will this increase, like JD.com, I think, was doing these temperature controlled delivery lockers for food outside of apartments? Will those catch on more? Will little scurrying robots, become more popular to deliver food? Will there be new disinfectant protocols? And how is this, if and how will this change sort of delivery going forward?
I think some of it's going to be a question of efficiency, though, because several companies have said, including Yum China, who owns KFC and Pizza Hut, have said that, obviously these processes they have to go through right now are making delivery less efficient. So I think, it'll be interesting to see if, some new more efficient way to implement this, disinfecting the cases or, temperature controlled lockers, if they come up with ways to accomplish that faster as a result of being forced to do delivery this way right now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the kind of the downstream impacts are. I think coronavirus just generally will be one of the stories of the year that's obviously broader than food. But I think it'll be interesting to see what the impact of the economy is and what the ultimate impact is on food delivery. Speaking of kind of things changing restaurants and impacting restaurants, you had a story this morning, Jen, and I got the author of the story right this time, Jen. I apologize, I keep messing up on that. You wrote a story about Tim Hortons, parent company Restaurant Brands International, also the parent company of Burger King, on their quarterly call, talked about how they're instituting and experimenting with digital menu boards. I think Tim Hortons is doing it in Canada, and kind of moving towards more personalized menu options. Talk a little bit about the story.
Right. So this was, like you said, things that were discussed on Restaurant Brand International's earnings call, which was yesterday. And so there were kind of two big standout pieces to that. One is these digital menu boards that Tim Hortons specifically is really increasing their expansion of, especially they have a few locations in the US, but most of their locations are in Canada. So I assume that's where most of these boards will be rolled out to. But these are basically another version of the digital menu board we're seeing in more drive-thrus now at QSRs, where they're using technology, AI, machine learning to gather weather data, traffic data, the location of this particular drive-thru. Eventually, we'll hit a point where past orders this customer has placed, taking all of that data and using it to decide what to offer the customer in terms of upselling items. Or it's also, people are saying this is also going to improve order accuracy, all of which is supposed to make the drive-through time, the time you spend in the drive-through from the time you get in to the time you pick up your food and drive out, faster, which is a big priority right now. Yeah. So that was one that Tim Hortons is doing. And then also Tim Hortons is also entering the second phase of its loyalty program for its mobile app. And this is where they're going to start working on making offers more personalized to the individual customer. And that's, again, it's based on what somebody has ordered in the past. It's based on, is it raining and 30 degrees outside? How about we offer some soup? That kind of thing.
What's interesting is it seems like they're hinging it on personal loyalty programs. I don't know about you. When I go to a grocery store, I do log in or put my little kind of loyalty card in because it gets me discounts. I think most of us aren't used to basically having like any sort of like loyalty program or kind of the fast food restaurant knowing who we are. So I think they're going to require the customer to have a little bit of a behavior change. So I'm interested to see if consumers will be kind of moving towards that and being okay with that. I definitely think all the stuff I've seen so far is wave one, where you basically go in and there's a little bit of customization, but it's not really towards you. Like, I don't go to McDonald's now and get the Mike Wolf menu, but it sounds like that's kind of like the next wave. I think, like you said, McDonald's is further along, but I'm interested in seeing that. And I do think it does require some sort of like loyalty program or kind of profile that they'll need and require the consumer to kind of buy into. So that'll be a big thing to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big piece of that will be how easy are they going to make it. Customers will opt in, I think, and be okay with giving away that, with a QSR having their information, if they're going to go and they're going to make it really easy for a customer to get exactly what they want, prepared the exact way they want, even if it's like, I think I use this example a lot, but I have a family member who, she likes all burgers from QSRs, very specific. It's just cheese and ketchup and the burger and the bread. That's it. If you go on to like a McDonald's self-service kiosk, you can't really customize for that option yet. So she's not going to sign up for a loyalty program if she can't just, in a matter of seconds, go onto the app, get her special kind of unusual or less common burger, they've got to be able to, the customization has to be much more granular, I think, than it is now to get more people to sign up and give that information away.
Yeah. I think Starbucks has people on loyalty programs, right? Because like you have the Starbucks app, they've done a really good job. I think they're really a leader in terms of mobile ordering. So But the thing about Starbucks is you don't go in there, you don't get a digital kiosk. What's interesting about the fast food is you're getting these kiosks, which present a perfect opportunity to do like menu customization, personalization kind of in venue. I think with Starbucks is probably on app, but I think it'll be a really interesting space to watch. I think this is going to be like one of the big areas of kind of battles, this personalization angle for the QSRs over the next decade or so.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to know what's on the Mike Wolf McDonald's menu now.
I know. I'm ready to order from it.
I was thinking if I'm on the, I think I don't know if I want to tell people if I'm on the McDonald's frequent flyer program. That's kind of embarrassing. Wait, Mike, you go to McDonald's so much you're a member of the club? Like, what's going on? But increasingly, if McDonald's got like an Impossible Burger or beyond, I'd probably put that on there because that's kind of what I get when I go to these places at this point.
I'm on the McDonald's loyalty program.
You are? Oh, I'm sorry. I just offended you and a bunch of other people. So. Well,
I mean, technically, I feel like I need to be for work. So it's your fault.
Yeah, listen, I absolutely love McDonald's. There's nothing better than McDonald's fries. Like they're the best things. And plug for McDonald's fries. They're not paying us. I just love them. But I just from like, hey, I'm too old to be eating fast food all the time. That's kind of my thing. So
I love that you gave up drinking, but you're still in with McDonald's.
Got to make your choices, Chris. What's on the Chris?
Pick your battles. I get it. Life is short, man. YOLO.
What's on the Chris Albrecht frequent flyer fast food menu?
I don't even go to, honestly. I mean, that makes me sound like, I don't know, snooty. But although I was curious, the Burger King, I was reading in their results that they had a 2-for-1 special on the Impossible. I'm at the beginning of the year was counting my calories, and I know that if I go to a fast food place, it will just obliterate the calorie count for the day.
Impromptu kind of story, discussion. Catherine, was there a story out this morning about how the Impossible hasn't had the effect on the bottom line that Burger King had hoped for?
Yeah, it says that it's been basically, I guess, a little over a year since Burger King widely rolled out the Impossible Whopper, and initially it gave a huge spike in sales. I think it was like 18% in terms of more foot traffic, and also people were buying bigger tickets every time that they purchased the Impossible Whopper, probably because it's slightly more expensive. But so they added this 2-for-1 deal last month, I think, to fight the fact that the growth has really slowed. And that's something we were talking about a little bit before this call, sort of, is this harbinger of things to come with the plant-based meat in fast food? Are people kind of getting tired of it, or it's more normalized, so it's no longer going to be this fast track to a bunch of growth? Or is it just a blip? Something to watch, especially as we can sort of compare the two case studies. We have Burger King, who was one of the early adopters, getting the Impossible Whopper on the menu, and then McDonald's, who has pretty much kept away from that. They're experimenting in Canada, but haven't adopted it widespread, so we can sort of compare and contrast between the two.
I wonder about the 2-for-1. Do you know what the price is? So one of the problems I thought like Impossible had it at fast food is it's just so expensive, right? Like there's a premium of a couple bucks. Mm-hmm. When I go to Red Robin, which I like the Red Robin version, like you have to add $3 as an add-on. And so I think part of the problem is the price points. There's also obviously been a lot of kind of like counter programming marketing from like Big Beef saying how processed it is. But I wonder if all these things are having impact. And if wonder if we're entering the phase of, I don't want to say price wars, but like to a certain degree, like commoditization, or kind of like them having to adjust the price points to go wider and get more people to eat them more regularly.
Yeah, I think it's $2 for $6 right now. So that is, I mean, I don't know if I choose. I usually do go McDonald's over Burger King, so I don't have as much data. Though I do like the Impossible Whopper. But that is something that, especially as these companies scale and things are getting cheaper and cheaper. Like it used to be you add $3 always across the board, at least for an Impossible Burger. And now that they're scaling up and they're making more, they're becoming more omnipresent. It's definitely, I've noticed, getting cheaper. And in some cases, even a 1-to-1 substitution. So that's something to just keep an eye on out there, something that we'll be exploring more at the Spoon. So,
that was one of the things that at the press conference at CES, we went to the unveiling of Impossible Pork, and then Dr. Pat Brown had an open Q&A at the end. And one of the things that I wanted to ask him, that someone beat me to it, was about the specific issue of price. And because he's talked about, like, I think the year before he talked about, hey, he wants to get to the point where this is basically as available to anyone, because they're obviously like an expensive product now, or they have been. But I wonder if we're entering that phase. And I certainly know that he talked about how they want to get to those like equal price points of other fast food. So we might just be entering that phase. Maybe they're looking to scale it and get it kind of to the point where they offer it at par with other products. So it'll be, like you said, we'll be watching it.
Yeah. Subscribe to Future Food newsletter if you're not already. We'll be tracking that and many more issues in the alternative protein space.
Yeah. And if you want to meet Catherine or I or Jen in New York City, we'll be there in just a couple weeks. Just use discount code podcast and to get 50% off tickets. But I think that's it for this week, guys.
We'll be talking about restaurant personalization and more. We got we got Jen talking about that, and we have stuff about nutrition, things from CPG companies. So it's going to be fun.
All right, guys. Thanks for getting together with me today, and thank you for listening, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Yep.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.